There are moments in life when, even though everything outside seems fine, inside we carry a heaviness that is hard to name. A silent fatigue, an emptiness without a clear cause, or a quiet question. Echoing in the middle of the night, why must human beings suffer? We search for answers in success, in love, in the recognition of others, yet the tighter we hold on, the stronger the sense of unease becomes. The peace we long for always seems to be somewhere far away, like a mirage on the horizon. Buddhism does not begin with a promise of happiness, but with a very honest truth. This life involves suffering. What is special, however, is that Buddhism does not speak of suffering to make people pessimistic or hopeless. On the contrary, looking directly at suffering is the very first doorway leading to inner freedom. When we dare to face our own suffering, without avoidance, without embellishment, we begin to step onto a path of deep understanding of the mind. In Buddhist teachings, suffering is not limited to major events such as loss, illness, or death. Suffering appears subtly in everyday moments, in anxiety about the future, in regret over the past. In the feeling of never having enough driven by desire. We suffer because we want everything to go our way, because we fear losing what we have, because we do not accept change as the nature of life. And paradoxically, the more we try to escape suffering, the more tightly it binds us. Buddhism does not view suffering as a punishment or as someone's fault. Suffering does not come to punish human beings, it comes as a silent teacher, reminding us to look again at how we are living, thinking, and clinging. When this is understood, suffering is no longer an enemy but becomes a doorway to wisdom. Only by understanding suffering can we truly understand peace. It is also here that Buddhism opens a very different perspective on inner peace. Peace is not a state without problems, without turbulence, or without negative emotions. Peace, in the Buddhist spirit, is the ability to remain at ease with what is, regardless of how external circumstances change. It is a deep inner stillness that does not depend on whether life is favorable or not. From this perspective, suffering and peace are not two separate extremes. They are closely connected, like two sides of the same coin. When we clearly understand the roots of suffering, peace naturally arises, not as something to be attained, but as a state that has always been there once the mind is no longer obscured by ignorance and attachment. Peace does not come from changing the world, but from transforming the way we see the world. The great lesson Buddhism offers is not how to completely eliminate suffering, because that is impossible in an impermanent world, but how to avoid letting suffering dominate the mind. When we clearly understand the nature of emotions, thoughts, and desires, we are no longer swept away by them. Suffering may still arise, but it no longer has the power to destroy inner calm. For this reason, the path Buddhism points to is a journey inward. Not to escape life, but to live more fully within it. As the mind becomes clear, we begin to realize that much suffering does not come from circumstances, but from the way we react to those circumstances. And from there, the door to peace gradually opens, gently yet firmly. Opening the door of understanding suffering in Buddhism is also opening the door to profound peace. Not a fragile peace dependent on external conditions, but a peace born of wisdom, mindfulness, and the ability to let go at the right time. This is not a path of blind belief, but a path of direct experience, where each person can verify it for themselves. And perhaps, when we slow down enough to listen to that silent teaching, we will realize that suffering is not the end point of life, but the beginning of awakening and true peace. In Buddhism, to deeply understand suffering and inner peace, one must first look at how the Buddha observed and explained the nature of human life. Buddhism does not approach suffering through abstract theory, but begins with the very real experiences of human beings in each moment of living. Suffering is not something abnormal, but a natural part of existence when human beings are still bound by ignorance and attachment. According to the core teachings of Buddhism, suffering arises from craving, attachment, and ignorance. We suffer because we want to hold on to pleasant experiences, want to get rid of unpleasant ones, and want life to operate according to our own will. When desires are not fulfilled, disappointment appears. When we obtain what we desire, fear of loss follows. This very cycle keeps the mind constantly fluctuating, restless, and never truly settled in the present moment. Buddhism points out that most suffering does not come from external circumstances, but from the way our mind reacts to those circumstances. Two people may go through the same event, yet their levels of suffering can be completely different. The difference does not lie in the event itself, but in perception, expectation, and attachment within each person's mind. When the mind is dominated by ignorance, we identify ourselves with emotions, thoughts, and situations, allowing suffering to control our inner life. One of the key insights of Buddhism is the truth of impermanence. All phenomena, from emotions and relationships to this very body, are constantly changing. When we do not accept impermanence, we try to grasp what cannot be held. This resistance to the natural flow of life creates tension and suffering. When impermanence is deeply understood, we begin to loosen our need for control, and from that point, the mind gradually becomes lighter. Alongside its explanation of suffering, Buddhism also opens a path leading to inner peace. Peace is not a state without suffering, but the ability to see suffering clearly without being swept away by it. With mindfulness, we recognize the arising of painful feelings without identifying ourselves with them. We see clearly, this is suffering, rather than, I am suffering. This mindful separation creates space for inner stillness to appear. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness and meditation play an important role in transforming suffering into understanding. When the mind is trained to return to the present moment, we begin to clearly see the nature of thoughts and emotions. They arise, exist, and then fade away, like clouds drifting across the sky. Realizing this, we are no longer carried away by each emotional wave, and inner peace gradually becomes a natural state. Buddhism also emphasizes that peace does not come from fulfilling every desire, but from letting go in the right way. Letting go does not mean abandoning life or responsibilities, but releasing blind attachment. When we live fully with what is present, without being obsessed with gain and loss, winning and losing, the mind becomes freer. And it is within this freedom that true peace can arise. Another profound aspect of Buddhist teachings is compassion, not only directed outward, but also turned toward oneself. When we understand that everyone is suffering in their own way, we judge less and resent less. Compassion softens the mind, helping us accept the imperfections of ourselves and others. Where there is acceptance and understanding, suffering gradually subsides. Finally, Buddhism teaches that suffering and peace do not exist in two separate worlds. They coexist within the same stream of consciousness. When ignorance remains, suffering dominates. When wisdom arises, peace is revealed. There is no need to search for peace elsewhere, for it is already present when the mind is no longer bound by craving and fear. Understanding this, human beings begin to live more deeply, more mindfully, and more gently within the flow of an impermanent life. Continuing along that flow, as we go deeper into how Buddhism views suffering, we begin to see clearly that suffering is not merely a temporary emotional state, but a functioning structure of the mind when it has not yet been illuminated by wisdom. Suffering arises in very small moments, when we wish someone had spoken differently, when we feel irritated because things do not go according to plan, when we compare ourselves with others and feel lacking. These seeds accumulate over time, forming a subtle background of unease that many people carry throughout their lives, without ever realizing it. Buddhism calls this state the wandering of the mind. The mind is not here, not now, but constantly runs back to the past in regret or rushes into the future in fear. This very departure from the present moment causes human beings to lose the ability to touch the peace that is already there. We live, but do not truly live. We breathe, but do not truly breathe. We are present, yet absent from our own lives. From this, suffering becomes familiar, almost normal. When practicing along the Buddhist path, one does not try to change life first, but begins by turning back to observe the mind. This observation is not meant to analyze or judge, but simply to see clearly. To see clearly a thought as it has just arisen, to see clearly an uncomfortable feeling spreading through the body, to see clearly the reflex to escape or resist. That very moment of clear seeing is already a step out of suffering, because when there is awareness, we are no longer completely identified with what is happening in the mind. One very subtle point in Buddhism is that transformation does not come from forced effort, but from deep understanding. When we clearly understand the nature of craving, craving naturally lessens. When we clearly see the impermanence of emotions, we naturally stop clinging tightly to them. Inner peace, therefore, is not the result of struggle, but the result of letting go at the right moment, in the right way. Buddhism also points out that many people seek peace by changing external circumstances. Changing jobs, changing relationships, changing places to live. Such changes are sometimes necessary, but if the mind has not been transformed, suffering will still appear in another form. The same old unease, simply wearing a new outfit. Therefore, Buddhism emphasizes that the root of suffering lies in the mind, and it is also there that peace must be found. As practice deepens, people begin to sense a form of peace very different from ordinary pleasant feelings. It is not an excited joy, nor a fragile calm dependent on external conditions. It is a quiet steadiness that allows us to remain at ease even when life is in upheaval. Sadness may still come, difficulties may still arise, but they no longer carry us away as before. The mind becomes spacious enough to hold every experience. Buddhism calls this state abiding in understanding. When we clearly understand that everything arises and passes away, that nothing belongs to us forever, we stop demanding that life be perfect. We allow things to be as they are. This very allowing brings a deep sense of relief, as if we set down a burden we have been carrying for a very long time without knowing we were carrying it. Another important shift on the path toward peace is a change in how we view ourselves. Instead of seeing ourselves as the center of everything, we begin to see ourselves as part of a larger flow of life. When the self is no longer so rigid, the wounds related to ego, comparison, and winning and losing gradually dissolve. From there, suffering loses one of its strongest sources of nourishment. The deeper we go into Buddhist teachings, the more we realize that peace is not a distant destination at the end of the path. Peace is present in every moment of awareness. In every instance when we recognize and do not follow a negative thought, in every breath that is exhaled with gratitude. It is very simple, yet very deep, and can only be recognized when the mind is sufficiently still. And it is precisely at this point that the journey of understanding suffering gradually opens the door toward its conclusion. When we no longer see suffering as something to be eliminated at all costs, but as something to be deeply understood, peace is no longer something to search for. It becomes the natural foundation of an awakened mind. From here on, the path ahead is no longer a flight from suffering, but a way of living fully, mindfully, and gently amid exactly what is happening. When looking back over the entire journey illuminated by Buddhism, we gradually realize a very simple yet profound truth: suffering is not something wrong with life, but a part of the process of awakening. It is precisely because human beings have the capacity to feel, to think, and to cling that suffering arises. And it is also for this very reason that human beings have the capacity to understand, to let go, and to transform. Buddhism does not stand on the side of denying suffering, but on the side of understanding suffering so that it no longer controls us. Many people spend their entire lives searching for peace as an ideal state, without anxiety, without sadness, without pain. But Buddhism gently points out that this is a subtle illusion. Peace does not lie in eliminating negative emotions, but in our relationship with them. When we stop resisting, stop judging, stop identifying ourselves with what is arising in the mind, then even in the midst of suffering, a deep stillness can be present. The wonder of Buddhist teachings lies in the fact that they do not require us to become someone else, but simply invite us to return to ourselves in a more complete and honest way. To return in order to clearly see unrecognized desires, fears that have never been listened to, wounds that have never been held with understanding. When the light of awareness touches those dark areas, suffering no longer needs to shout to be noticed. It begins to settle, naturally and deeply. Inner peace, in the spirit of Buddhism, is not a reward reserved for the perfect, but the natural result of a mind that knows how to look deeply and let go at the right time. When we understand that everything is impermanent, we demand less that life remain fixed. When we understand that there is no self that must be protected at all costs, we are less wounded by the words and actions of others. And when we understand that suffering is a part of the human condition, we stop blaming ourselves whenever unease appears. It can be said that Buddhism does not offer human beings an escape from life, but offers a way to remain with life without being crushed by it. To remain with awareness. To remain with compassion. To remain with the breath moving in and out in this very moment. Then, even though life still has its ups and downs, the mind no longer drifts helplessly with each emotional wave as before. And perhaps the most important reminder Buddhism offers us is this: peace is not something that must be attained in some distant future. It is present the moment we stop searching for it with tension. The moment we pause, look deeply, and allow things to be exactly as they are. The moment we accept that suffering does not make us less worthy, but simply makes us more human. If you are currently in a period of uncertainty, full of questions and nameless suffering, it is hoped that these reflections may become a small lamp, not one that dispels the darkness immediately, but enough to help you see that you are not alone on this journey. The Buddhist path does not promise a life without suffering, but it opens the possibility of living more freely amid suffering. And that may be the greatest gift of all. If you feel a sense of resonance with this content, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring deeper perspectives on Buddhism, meditation, and inner life together. And if you have any reflections, experiences, or questions about suffering and peace on your own journey, do not hesitate to leave a comment below. Every sincere sharing can become a bridge of connection, helping us understand one another more deeply and walk more steadily together on the path of awakening.